Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with veteran jazz pianist, composer, and educator Frank Kimbrough. He spent his childhood in Roxboro, North Carolina, a very small town, then would move on to Chapel Hill, then Washington, D.C., and that all culminated to his current home of New York City since 1981, when you could actually afford to live there. He's played and learned from the best, like Herbie Nichols, and he spoke about his newest 2016 album called Solstice, and it's a great listen, and he is very happy about it. He's a big name in jazz and has been recognized by Downbeat consistently as one of the best on his instrument, and he plays all over the place. These days, he teaches at Julliard, and he has some great stories, so dig this interview, my friends.
Hey, Frank, thanks again for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
No problem at all.
And I'm going to go ahead and start off here. I know you're pretty clear about activity that's going on in your life, but in your own words, give me a snapshot of what's going on with your music lately.
Well, there's the trio record that comes out on November 25th, and that week I'll be playing at the Jazz Standard with the Maria Schneider Orchestra all week, Tuesday through Sunday. We'll have Thursday off for Thanksgiving, but we'll be there all week with that group. Last night I played at the Stone with Marty Ehrlich, Ron Horton, Mark Momas, Mike Serene, and Dean Johnson, playing the music of Andrew Hill. Mostly the music that he wrote for his sextet back in the first decade of this millennium. And tomorrow night I'm playing a sort of a tribute of sorts to the pianist Don Friedman, who passed last summer. And so I'm going to be playing it at the Catano in New York. And the theme for the night is remembering Don Friedman, so we're doing that. And then Sunday, I'm playing a memorial for Connie Carruthers that's being held at Roulette. So things are pretty busy. Some of the occasions are, they're a little sad because we're losing so many great musicians. But things are busy. And I'm also teaching at Julliard. I'm still there. I've been there this is my 9th year.
Wonderful.
And, full-time there, so I'm fairly busy there. And, just doing what we do.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about this latest album with your trio, Solstice. Give me an idea of what went into this album. How do you feel about it now in the afterglow of it?
Well, I've made a lot of records, and one's records are sort of like one's children. You don't necessarily pick a favorite because they're all yours, and you made them all. But I think that this might be the record of all the records I've made. Perhaps this is the one that I'm most pleased with. Part of it is the material that we chose, and part of it's just sometimes the stars just align. I have a sort of maybe a slightly unorthodox way of working in that I don't rehearse. I never rehearse. This music, I picked out the music in the week leading up to the session, and I never choose. If we're making a record, I'm not going to say, well, these are the 9 tunes that we're going to do. I'll choose maybe 15 tunes, more than I need, and then no rehearsal, and I just make sure that the music, where music is read, is clear, and very little discussion, almost none at all. Jay and I have been playing together, well, and actually Jeff too. I've been playing with them for 20 years now, off and on in various contexts. Jay is in Maria Schneider's group, so we play together in that context and in other contexts as well. And I've played with Jeff Hirschfield for probably about 20 years too. I've never made a record with Jay and Jeff, but their association goes back 20, 30 years as well. You know, they were sort of a house rhythm section for a while for the Steeplechase record label based in Denmark. And their producer would come over, and their recording sessions would be very spontaneous, usually little or no rehearsal. And, you know, they'd make a record in 5 hours. And oftentimes those guys would come in and they'd make 12 records in a week.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. You know, the guy would come over from Denmark and they would do maybe 2 or sometimes 3 sessions a day.
Yeah.
And so they're very good at being very present, you know. And so that's the way we play. We don't, you know, we're listening to each other a lot, and so the music that I brought in that day, coincidentally, I didn't think about it ahead of time, but 5 of the 9 tunes on the record were written by women. And I don't know how many records you could, you know, I don't know how many records you could say that about.
Right.
One is by my wife, Marianne DeProfetis, and actually I was in bed the night before the record date, looking over the music, making sure I had enough copies of everything and making sure that everything was clear. And she brought a tune in that and she just put it in my hand and said, well, you know, if you guys have time, maybe you'll want to do this one. And so we sight read it on, you know, at the session the next day, and the first take was the take, and that's the title tune of the record as well.
Beautiful.
So I think 7 of the 9 tunes on the record were first takes. We hadn't played. Almost all the music was new to us, you know, to maybe not so much to me, but to Jeff and to Jay. And you know, we just kind of set them up and knocked them down. And the way I think about playing music is the first take is the one that's going to have the most. It's the most intense because everybody's listening. You haven't played the song before, so everybody's senses are sort of heightened, and you know that there's a chance for a second take, but you don't want to do that. So you're playing, and it's real, and it's immediate, and it's spontaneous, and you know, we don't talk about, well, you play the first solo on this one, or I'm going to play 2 choruses, and then, you know, this is going to happen. We don't talk about any of that stuff, or even how the tune is supposed to go at all. We're just playing.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is a reason to get up in the morning, you know, because that's, for me, the only way to make music, really.
Right on.
Now, if you're playing in a big band, you can't do that, right? Because you've got 18 people to deal with. But in a trio, especially one like this, where, you know, we're familiar with each other's playing, we know each other's aesthetic and what we're about, and, you know, it's not like we even see each other socially that much outside of the playing environment. You know, I called Jeff Hirschfield, for instance. He's on the road a lot and busy, and I called him and said, yeah, you know, we can do this record, and we didn't really talk about anything. And then, you know, he's walking east from 9th Avenue, and I'm walking west from 8th Avenue, and we met right under the awning of the studio and went in. It's just that kind of thing, you know. It's a conversation, and it's one thing about this record, I think, that makes it slightly different from my other ones. And again, you know, you go in and make the music, and then the backstory appears after the music is made, because you don't go into a session to do a certain kind of session. You go into a session to play music, and then you put it all together at the end, and you look at what you have, and you think, wow, there's 5 tunes here by, you know, composed by women, or in this case, too, this is a very beautiful record. It's the concept, if you will, was, we set up in the same room. There's no headphones. We're playing to each other in the room, just like we're playing in the living room at home. And nothing was forced, and nothing was arranged, and nothing was talked about. So I think it's really fresh, and I think it's, the interaction between us is palpable. It's very real, and it's beautiful, and I don't know. I'm very pleased with the record. I'm very pleased with it.
Absolutely. Well, let me go back in time here a little bit and figure out how did a guy from Roxboro, North Carolina, grow up to become such a veteran and a big shot in the jazz world?
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know if I'm a big shot, but, I do enjoy being in New York, and I feel very fortunate that my phone rings. I came from a town of 5,000 people in North Carolina, a very small town. Growing up, if I wanted to buy a book, if I wanted to see a movie, if I wanted to buy a record, I had to drive 30 miles. There was nothing there, and it remains so. My mother was a piano teacher. Her mother was a piano teacher. They both taught at home. I think, I don't even remember a time in my life that I didn't play. So I started playing very, very early on, maybe age 3, something like that. And, my mom was involved very heavily with the local church, and so, anytime the church doors were open, she would be there, and then, of course, I had to be there, too. And so I heard a lot of music, choir practices, things like that. She taught piano at home, so did my grandmother, so, people would walk in the door, and they'd sit down at the piano and play, so I guess I kind of joke around that I thought everybody did it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just around, me, but not jazz. It was more church music or classical music, or, I heard country western music on the radio, or R&B, top 40 stuff. Jazz, I didn't really come into contact with until I was a teenager, and I saw Bill Evans' trio on TV one night, quite by accident. Just, you turn on the TV, and there's Bill Evans. And it took a couple of years, I think, for that even to manifest,
Yeah.
Because I was listening to rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
I was a kid, in the 60s and early 70s, and so I was listening to a lot of that stuff and playing in little rock bands and stuff, with my friends, and taking classical piano lessons. I knew that I wasn't going to be a classical pianist. I had no desire for that. And I'd play with my friends and, in our little rock bands and stuff, and I didn't quite get what I needed from either one of those things. And then there was this spontaneous yet disciplined music that I all of a sudden realized that this was something that maybe would be interesting. So I started, listening to that music, and then I went to college, and I went to college very interested in jazz. Unfortunately, my teachers weren't. So they, at one point, I went into a jury with a Bill Evans transcription and a couple of Chick Corea transcriptions, and in addition to my classical stuff that I was working on, the teachers, my teachers didn't really like that, so they gave me an F in piano.
Mm.
So that started me looking for alternatives,
Huh.
And the alternative was to quit school. So I never got a degree, and I moved around a little bit. I ended up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, formed my first trio there when I was 21, 22, and then moved to D.C. a couple of years later, and then an opportunity came to move to New York, so player and drummer and me just threw all our stuff in a van one day and came to New York. And at that time, you could live here, without a six-figure income.
Yeah.
I think our rent was $260 a month, split three ways. That was 35 years ago.
Wow.
And it was tough, but we got by. And I tell my students that the first 12 years here were the hardest. And in about 1992, I helped form the Jazz Composers Collective with Ben Allison and Ted Nash and Ron Horton and some other people, and was invited to join Maria's band about 6 months later in March of 93. And, here it is almost 24 years later. I'm still playing with Maria. I'm still playing with Ben. I'm still playing with Ron. I'm still playing with Ted. So these associations that we made 20-some years ago have held, and then you add to your collection of friends and associates, and so I feel very lucky to be a part of the scene here in New York, and it's been very gratifying. I love it. I love being busy here. I don't feel like I need to travel so much, especially with the teaching gig at Julliard. So at this point, my MO is to go where invited.
Right on.
Right? Yeah.
No. I was just going to ask you, you've dedicated your life to jazz. You've obviously been around. You've recorded 20-plus albums. Let me ask you this. Why do you love jazz?
Well, because it represents democracy and freedom. Really, that's the bottom line. We all grow up, those of us who play, we grow up, there's a discipline involved, certainly, but then what are you going to do with that? I don't want to play the same thing every night. My mentor, one of my main mentors was Paul Bley, a great pianist who passed away early this year. And, Paul instilled a lot of things in me, or at least confirmed a lot of things that I was maybe already wondering about and thinking. But one of those things is, if you know what's going to happen at the gig, you may as well stay home. Mm-hmm. If you know what's going to happen. So the idea is, to go and to be open and to be listening to the other musicians so that you can contribute. In other words, the gig is there. You have the best seat in the house on the bandstand, and you're also invited to play. Yeah. So what better situation could you have? The idea of going out and playing a show is absolutely anathema to me. I have no desire for that. If there's no surprises in the evening of music, then there's no music for me.
Yeah.
So that's really what it's about, and it's about giving everybody having an equal voice, and it's about having the freedom to exercise that voice in a way where everyone's sort of getting along and harmonizing together.
Let me ask you this. Of all the fans you've played for over the years, what's one of the nicest things that anybody has said to you about your music?
Well, and this is something that I try to impress upon my students, is that any gig that we do, playing for an audience, or in fact any recording that you make, we usually are not aware of it, but we have the power to actually change people's lives. It's not about fame, and it's not about ego, and it's not about any of that stuff. It's really about the power of communication, and like, for instance, a couple of things that made me realize what music is really for is getting a call from a woman I know who told me that she had just given birth to her first son, and that she had taken my recording into the birthing room to give her comfort in that, fairly painful time. Or for somebody who is listening to my music as they lie dying.
Mm.
That music can heal, or that music can provide solace, or that music can provide comfort or inspiration, or any of that.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I think really let us know what the music is for, and also how important it is to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. Everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, your students, those that you play music for. But who do you think you are? When you wake up and face the world, who do you think you are?
I could quote Dewey Redman. Dewey Redman was one of my heroes, the great tenor saxophone player, and I had the pleasure of playing with him the last year and a half he was with us. And he used to say, I'm just a country boy trying to make it in the big city. But that's, there's really some truth to that. I'm teaching at Julliard. I'm working with immensely gifted young people, and it's very humbling, to work with kids that, maybe they don't have a lot of depth in their playing yet, or maybe they don't have a lot of experience yet, but they're immensely gifted, and that reminds me of where I was at that, at their point in life, where they are now, and I look at where I was then, and I didn't know anything. It's humbling, and living in a city like New York, where 1 out of 25 people on the street is a musician. There's 300,000 of us in this city. Not all playing jazz, but there's a lot of musicians here.
Yeah.
I run into Itzhak Perlman in the elevator at school. Wynton Marsalis is my boss, and we run into incredible, talented people. Some of whom are very well known. Some of whom you'll never hear of ever.
Yeah.
And a lot of that thing, that name recognition and stuff is, you can buy that, or sometimes you can't buy it. It's a very mysterious kind of thing. There are people right now practicing in basements that nobody will ever hear of.
Yeah.
And why is that? So I feel very lucky that that I have had the opportunities that I've had. Very grateful.
Well, Frank, thank you for opening up about your career. Thank you for opening up about your newest album. Good luck with it, and I appreciate your time and all the music.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope you and your audience will enjoy the music.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, North Carolina, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Frank for his music and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.